This all started with medical patients and a requirement and a need where the government recognized that patients should have access to cannabis.
Pain or general therapeutic for sleep aid, those percentages are much higher in the Zoomer group than they are with the rest of the population.
I think we need a broader coalition of healthcare practitioners involved, making decisions based on clinical evidence.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. Thank you to our virtual audience for joining us today. It's great to see all of your faces. Now, 3 years ago, recreational cannabis became legal here in Canada on October 17th, 2018. On today's show, we look back on this moment and reflect on what's changed and what the future of cannabis could look like, plus brand new research looking at perceptions about cannabis, attitudes toward and behaviors around usage, how cannabis impacts the use of pharmaceutical drugs and other medications, and more. Some really interesting facts in there, but before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
It's been 3 years since cannabis was legalized in Canada. So what's changed? According to a new study, overall stigma of the plant continues to fade, with support for legalization at 67%. Meanwhile, usage has also climbed. Nearly 20% of adults consider themselves users, up from 3.8 million in 2018. When pressed on which form of cannabis consumers were looking for, edibles took the lead, followed closely by the dry bud and pre-roll joints. 74% of users today say they purchased their pot legally, up from 52% in 2019, demonstrating the success of legalization in just a few years.
Joining me now to discuss brand new data looking at Canadian consumers and cannabis is Pat Pellegrini, President and CEO of Vividata, and David Cravit, Chief Marketing Officer of CARP, a new vision of aging. It's great to have you both here at the panel and in studio. It feels a little bit like normal again, doesn't it? It's hard to believe, Pat, but it's been 3 years since cannabis was legalized in Canada. The sky didn't fall, though many might have predicted that it might have. How have Canadians' attitudes toward the drug changed?
Yeah, we did our first study pre-legalization because most of my clients who are marketers, communication agencies, media companies, didn't know that much about what consumers thought about cannabis. In 2018, only 53% of Canadians were supportive of legislation. And the biggest group actually was there was an opposition group of about 33%. The next year, when it became legal, it only moved to 54%.
So 1 percentage point increase.
1 percentage point. But the opposition group shrunk the most, and it went to undecided. So I think a lot of Canadians, as you said, weren't sure, was the sky still going to fall? At that point, the rollout was pretty shaky. There wasn't a lot of retail across provinces. Things were variable. By 2021, that number shot up to 67% in support. There's still about 21% undecided, but the opposition number is very small now. So I think it's
What do you make of that culture change, David? I mean, that's a pretty significant jump.
Right.
Are the taboos lifting? What's going on here?
I think, and we'll get into some of the detail, but I think from CARP's perspective and the perspective of the Zoomer audience generally, it's starting to tie in more to health issues. And we know that this is an audience. We know our members are very interested in anything new that affects health and prevention and wellness. They're interested in sleeping better. They're interested. We did a show here on the Zoomer several weeks ago about psychedelics as a drug. So it's more an openness to consider what's new that I can ingest that is better for my health. So it's not so much I know all about cannabis and now I'm strongly in favor. It's like I'm open. Tell me more. Mm-hmm. I'm not as opposed to it. And I think that accounts for, we see a large audience at home on this show. I know our CARP members are very interested in this topic.
So further to that, how has usage changed? And I know there's a bunch of points we want to get through. So how has usage changed since pre-legalization?
Yeah, so again, in 2018, of course, you're asking people about something that was not legal at the time. About 3.8 million Canadians, 19 plus, said they were users. And that group was pretty evenly shared between those sort of under 30, 30 to 44, and Zoomers. But by 2021, that number is 6.1 million. And the largest growth has been in the Zoomer group, almost doubled 1.7 times more users. So a big change in terms of usage. It's not the young people. I think
it's funny. I think a lot of people thought that it might have been the young millennials that would see the biggest growth, but in fact, it's the 45 plus range.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. So then, speaking of Zoomers, what is it that they're using cannabis for? What are they interested in?
So Zoomers, similar to all users 19 plus, relax and unwind, to have fun, to improve a mood. But there's a lot more skewing towards health and wellness, as you mentioned, David. So whether that's for pain or general therapeutic, for sleep aid, those percentages are much higher in the Zoomer group than they are with the rest of the population.
You mentioned health and wellness. What about some of the medical conditions that people are treating with cannabis?
Yeah, so there's whether it's mental health, so in general mental health, sleeplessness, insomnia, menstrual cramps, fatigue, nausea. So all of those are being treated with some kind of a cannabis product or a therapeutic. The part that we look at as Vividata is also how many Canadians claim to have those ailments. And so the untapped population is there's 12 million Canadians, over 12 million Canadians who say they have some mental health issue. There's almost 12 million Canadians who deal with pain. So when you look at 12 or 13% using cannabis, there's an incredible amount of possibilities there for the cannabis industry to help in these areas.
Do these numbers surprise you at all, David?
No, because the demographic of Zoomers, whether it's 45 to 65, let's say the younger half, or the older 65 plus, are increasingly interested in anything that works, because the culture now is, yes, I want the healthcare system to do certain things, but I also am responsible for my own health and wellness, particularly when it comes to prevention. Mm-hmm. And so cannabis comes into that climate. It just drops into that existing climate. And I'm not surprised at all at these findings.
Now, we're short on time, but I have to squeeze this in there because this is something that really interests me, was the impact legalization of cannabis had on the use of pharmaceutical drugs and other medications. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, that's a point that we emphasize all the time. So of users of cannabis for health and wellness, 80% said it was more effective than what they've been using, so pharmaceutical. 55% say it reduced their dependence on a prescription medication. And if you look at all products, so all users of cannabis, yes, there's going to be an uptick in things like candy and chips and snack food, et cetera, but there's decreases in alcohol, decreases in smoking, and the biggest decreases are in pain medications and other medications, and those are double-digit decreases, 24, 25%.
Okay, we need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll welcome the rest of the panel to break this all down.
Studies have been done in the United States with medical cannabis, a 64% reduction in opioid doses, and a further 45% improvement in the quality of life.
Welcome back to theZoomer. We've been discussing what's changed since cannabis was legalized in 2018. I'd like to welcome to the panel remotely Umar Syed, president of Optican, the medical division for Heritage Cannabis, Dr. Stephen Glazer, chief medical officer at Cannaway Clinic and specialist in obesity medicine, and Ken Weisbrod, the former lead executive for the cannabis business and strategy development at Shoppers Drug Mart. Thank you to you all for being here. Umar, I'd like to start with you. The stigma is fading, consumption is rising. Did anything stand out to you about some of this data?
No, well, I wasn't surprised by it, really. I mean, we've been seeing this trend happening over the last few years. I think more and more people are realizing, especially in the Zoomer demographic, the medical component or the health and wellness component of medical cannabis. And, you know, I think the big gap, and as we were talking about the larger population not understanding, perhaps in the Zoomer demographic as well, is the fact that there's a stigma still associated with inhaled cannabis. So if we can get modern medicine and merge it with cannabis medicine in terms of traditional dosage forms that work as well as inhaled cannabis, which has been a bit of a gap so far, I think we can start going after the mass market who want access to these products for relief, but don't necessarily have the products today or haven't had them in the past. And that's something what our company, Optican and Heritage, are really focused on, is producing new form factors that can let people who are in the medical world really access a an alternative.
That's interesting. We do know a little bit, Pat, about the different types of alternatives that people are consuming, and it's less smoking, isn't it?
Yeah, smoking and the pre-rolls, we're number one sort of with recreational users, but health and wellness users and potential users wanted soft gels, they wanted topicals, they wanted something that mimicked pharmaceutical and controlled dosages, absolutely.
Now, Ken, a decade ago, cannabis had a profile that was close to tobacco, let's call it. It was generally frowned upon, regarded as unsavory, if you will. Today, that profile has shifted to be one that's a little bit more like alcohol. I think it's more accepted socially. And so I'm curious what you think has happened in the last couple of years, even decade or so, that's caused that shift in perception.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, cannabis has been viewed for many, many years from a health and wellness perspective. And, people, I think they forget, in the recreational dynamic that this all started with medical patients and a requirement and a need where the government recognized that patients should have access to cannabis. So it's been pushed in that direction. Just to follow up on what Umar said, I think at this stage, I would love to see accessibility for medical patients and wellness and have that accessibility point in a pharmacy where we can get right to the point with patients and have healthcare professionals have oversight of the choices that they make.
Dr. Glazer, one of the things we know about in places where marijuana is legal is that there seems to be less opioid abuse. Certainly in Pat's finding, he found 55% saw a reduction in the amount of prescription drugs that they're using. Does that suggest that this is somehow proof that marijuana is a bona fide treatment alternative for pain, or what does that tell you?
Well, first, let me highlight the issue with respect to opioids. In the United States, about 100 people per day that die from opioid overdoses. So it really is a significant issue. And especially within the medical population that we treat at Cannaway Clinic, where our average patients are 58 years old, there are many, many comorbidities that exist with medications. And so minimizing opioids, for example, or narcotics has a huge benefit of quality of life. So studies have been done in the United States where there, with medical cannabis, a 64% reduction in opioid doses and a further 45% improvement in the quality of life. So I think that there is a very legitimate role for medical cannabis to supplement some medications where appropriate.
Mm-hmm. All right, don't go away. We'll be right back with more after this break.
You really do need the expertise of someone who is, specifically trained in cannabis, because serious consequences can come about.
Welcome back. Prior to legalization, the general assumption was that more younger Canadians would become cannabis users. However, in the last 3 years, Zoomers, 45 plus, showed the greatest increase in usage. Nearly twice as many Zoomers are now using cannabis compared to 2018. So Pat, where does that increase come from then? Is it tied to the different formats that are available to people?
Yeah, it's health and wellness users and also the form factors that are available to them. So they're twice as likely. So if for example, all users, 17% preferred some kind of a tincture, they're at double that rate. So they want a tincture, they want a form factor that's like a soft gel. They don't want the smoking or pre-roll. Edibles are popular with both groups.
David, you'll remember at the beginning when it was legalized, there was so much confusion about where do I get it and what are the different forms that are available to me. And you'll remember the fiasco with the retail shops, and you went into one shop and there was some untrained kid working, and then in another shop there was a specialty, and then there was the mail order. And then a lot of people thought, okay, well, there's all this stuff going on. Does my doctor know what's happening here? Do you think that there's a lag in information, or at least has been a lag in information for the general consumer?
Definitely. We did a focus group at CARP. Now, it wasn't statistically big sample like Pat's study, but we did a focus group right at the beginning. And they all said, A, we're a little bit confused, but B, we don't yet know enough to be able to separate the quality of the advice. And who do we turn to for advice? And by the way, my doctor is way behind the curve. I know I'm talking about family physicians as a group, not an individual doctor. And speaking to a point Ken made earlier, I think there was a great sort of partly spoken, partly unspoken. The pharmacist is the one guy, he's got all my prescriptions. He also knows what herbs and supplements and vitamins I'm buying anyway. There's kind of like a locus there in every neighborhood. And he can't quite weigh in the way I'd like him to. Where do I go? Who do I trust? It was like the Wild West. And our audience was very aware of and not at all happy about that, fragmentation, if you will. Now I think with time it's obviously gotten better, and we see how it's settling in.
I do want to go to you, Umar, because the market does seem to have just be so oversaturated with shops. I mean, they're on every single corner, to David's point, and I think that there's a lot of confusion about where do I go to get the right information and the right product for me?
Yeah, right. So I think that's one of the big gaps in the marketplace overall, and that's going to hinder the ability for people to access products that actually work. And to the point, I mean, there's a stigma associated with inhaled cannabis that people prefer other dosage forms. But many of the other dosage forms, we don't know exactly how well they work either. I think we need a broader coalition of healthcare practitioners involved, making decisions based on clinical evidence. And that evidence has been lacking to date. That's a gap that Optican is trying to fill as quickly as possible with well-formulated, pharmaceutically engineered products, with tested for absorption and other characteristics that you typically need. Decisions that are hard to make in the absence of information. I just don't think the current retail structure as it's put out by the provinces and the government are amenable to all of what I just said, mainly because the bud tenders aren't not necessarily educated in this regard, but also they're muzzled as well as to what they can say from a health benefit perspective for each product. So there's a real gap in the marketplace right now in terms of both products. So we're trying to fill that gap, but also the advice patients can get from trusted sources on which products, what dosage forms, and what doses.
You say muzzled. Do you mean just the draconian restrictions that are put on advertising and labeling and that sort of thing?
No, it's a little, well, of course that, but the reality is the retail shops are not allowed to make any health or wellness type of recommendations on specific products, and they're heavily monitored by provincial bodies. There are secret shoppers that go out to make sure that that is not happening, that they're not giving health and wellness advice. So now when they're actually asked for specific information, they try not to give too much information that will get them into hot water with the regulatory bodies.
It actually behooves me to make a very important point. And the discussion here, and my expertise is in medical cannabis. And so I can't emphasize, especially in a older population, how important it is to not just willy-nilly go out and start trying. Many people have many medical conditions and many medications that can interact with cannabis. And so you really do need the expertise of someone who is, specifically trained in cannabis, because serious consequences can come about. So I would say it's always best to be cautious because there may be information that you may not be aware of. And that's my concern about not seeking expertise in this area.
Good advice there. All right, we'll be right back with more of the Zoomer.
This is the type of thing I think is required. Doing the clinical tests will make physicians and pharmacists and patients understand and trust that the product that they're using works and is safe.
I do a little bit of everything. I like to switch it up. I get bored really quick. I do joints, I smoke blunts.
I think it's a better option than alcohol. I really do.
I do volcanoes.
I have a topical that I've been putting on. It's kind of like a Rub A535. It's, I guess it's a CBD oil.
I do vapes. I make my own cookies. And I love to make it for other people because it's self-medicating and you're helping everybody else along the way.
There's some people that can't handle it, but I don't think it's destroying society or anything. I think it's creating more opportunities than anything.
Marijuana shops are the new coffee shops.
I just don't think we need that many. I don't think the demand is out there to support that many shops, and we should allow that retail space for other small businesses.
I think it's nuts. There's probably more than enough places for people to get it, and there's probably too many places for people to get it, which means somebody's going to lose out.
Welcome back. After a boom in the cannabis industry following legalization in 2018, experts are predicting a rough patch for the sector in the coming years, primarily due to the oversupply of cannabis. Ontario just surpassed 1,000 open and authorized retailers. So where's the industry going next? And where will it be in 2030? Your thoughts, David?
Well, I think if you take the curve we're on now and you just logically say where it's going to happen, there will be more clinical studies and more medical underpinnings to the recommendation that a doctor may make. To Omar's point, it's bound to, because it's already going on. So that will happen. I think that 10 years more experience, our audience, the Zoomers, will have that experience. They will have tried things on their own. They will have tried things with the advice of their doctor. Their things will have worked, things will not have worked. So you're just going to see an increase in the awareness and the knowledge of the consuming public, because the one thing that is constant, or in fact growing, is the thirst for information among the Zoomer population. They are absolutely open, active seekers of information. And as that information comes flowing into the marketplace, they will respond. So you will see an increasingly informed usage of cannabis. And I think you'll also see more segmentation and individualization, the way you see now with, are people taking low-dose aspirins to ward off strokes and heart attacks? Some are, some aren't. Some doctors say it's good, some doctors say it's bad. You're just going to see more sophisticated usage and more variety.
I saw that headline recently. Ken, medical marijuana advocates have been urging the government to get pharmacists on board for a long time to dispense medical marijuana. I'm curious why we're not there yet.
There's a review coming. Back in 2012, under the Harper government, there was the proposal to have medical cannabis in pharmacies before the recreational equation was even there. And for lots of reasons, the National Association passed on it. And back in those days, and still to a large degree, the stigma is alive and well. But shoot forward to today, that position has changed, and it would be amazing for that point of access to open up. And for the points that were made by the doctor, these drugs, cannabis is consumed for health and wellness, and it does interact. Not everyone should be on cannabis. It inhibits certain drugs that you take and increases the absorption of other drugs. And it requires oversight by physicians and pharmacists, and it needs to be in the medical supply chain. The other great thing I think you're going to see in the future is companies that are going to be manufacturing cannabis products at a higher degree than they are today. In Canada, there's a process called the Drug Establishment License. That's good manufacturing processes. And certain cannabis companies are starting to move in that direction. And those companies that are able to achieve that status of being able to manufacture at a high standard will be able to go down the route of doing studies to support their cannabis products to get claims associated with them. And once that happens, then you'll see cannabis products that are directed that physicians can point to for osteoarthritis, for rheumatoid arthritis, potentially opioid reduction, because there'll be those claims. And when that happens, I'm sure you'll start to see some of these products on the OTC aisle of a pharmacy or behind the counter. So that's really encouraging.
Dr. Glazer, if you were talking to our audience, let's say a year from now or a couple years from now, what advice do you give them? What do you predict will change? What will the future look like? And what would you say to them?
Well, I think that unlike many years ago, we are actually very fortunate that we have other options that can be used in treating mostly chronic illnesses. So I would say that patients should engage in a conversation with their healthcare practitioner. And I actually wholeheartedly endorse the utility, the clinical utility of a pharmacist, as they're often more aware than the prescribing physicians about the whole armamentarium of medications that individuals are taking. And I would ask and engage in a sort of a cooperative discussion where the patient has an active role in self-advocating, and the physician has an obligation to be educated. And that's another area of focus that we really need to focus in on to educate both from an educational deficit point of view, but also work on the stigma.
Yeah, a
Completely
lot of
agree.
nodding heads at the table here. Omar, how's the medical division of Heritage preparing for the future?
Our first and foremost mission is to make sure there's evidence behind every product that we make. So we clinically test them. We make sure there's a good absorption. Most of these cannabinoids, when taken orally, are poorly absorbed. So we put pharmaceutical technology to enhance the absorption generate that data in peer-reviewed journals, make that available to physicians, pharmacists, and other people who may be interested in prescribing these medications, and then make that available to the public as well. We want to really stand out from the other products on the market because we're putting the rigor, the scientific evidence behind our products, both on the design and the formulation using pharmaceutical technology, and then making sure products do actually work. And I said that before, so we have our CB4 control film strips. CBD is used for anxiety. When people inhale the vapor, we like to be able to mimic that quick, rapid onset with a product that is not inhaled, and we use a film strip that goes under the tongue and can relieve anxiety relatively quickly, similar to a CBD coming from a joint or a vaporized pen. So this is the type of thing I think is required, making these products with rigor and technology, and then doing the clinical tests required to make physicians and pharmacists and patients understand and trust that the product that they're using works and is safe.
All right, and I know after the break we've got quite a few questions from our audience about the different types of ailments that you can treat with cannabis, so stay tuned for that. There's more after the break. Don't go away.
It seems like the drugs are out there and available, but I find it difficult to find resources to know what would treat what conditions.
Welcome back. I'd like to welcome a couple of folks from our audience to ask their questions, and we will start with Linda. Hey, Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda Gunn. I'm 70 years old from Brecon, Ontario. And I'm just wondering, when will more information become more readily available? It seems like the drugs are out there and available, but I find it difficult to find resources to know what would treat what conditions.
Omar, do you want to take this one?
Thank you for that question. And we are working very hard to make resources available on optican.ca as well for our products, but in general. And I think this is the area that we get stepped up on before. There's been a focus on the recreational side, and people have gotten away from publishing the resources that are actually available in literature. What we're doing now is providing a lot of that literature and tying it together with specific products in terms of what level of CBD, THC, and other cannabinoids may be useful. I think more and more licensed producers like ourselves should be doing that work for the general public. There are some regulations around Health Canada on what you can put on there that on your website or that is considered promotional. So we're being very careful to stay within the regulatory framework. And that's been the hindrance for a lot of people in the past as well. But again, we will be making that available more and more on our website in the upcoming month. Dr. Glazer, you may have an opinion on this.
Yeah, Linda, excellent question. And I think the answer to your question is part of our passion, for example, at Cannaway, where, I would encourage you to seek an opinion from people who are specialized in medical cannabis. And at Cannaway, for example, first of all, 80% of our patients are cannabis naive. They've never used cannabis. So we really do dedicate a large amount of time to patient education. We have educators that sit with patients and answer all the questions and provide information. So if you're seeking information, I would encourage you to seek out a medical cannabis clinic and sit with educators and physicians, healthcare professionals who are expert in this area.
Thank you for that question, Linda. Next question is from Sandra. Hey, Sandra.
Hi, I'm Sandra. I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm 72 years old. My question is, presently I'm getting medical marijuana from my pharmacy. It's a trade name of Nabalon. And I'm wondering what the difference in that versus the CBD capsules.
Thank you for that question. So Nabalone is a synthetic THC. It's a medication that's made and it's the pharmaceutical industry brand. It lacks certain components that is utilized in medical cannabis. And what do I mean by that? Well, there are other components that are available through medical cannabis ingestion. We actually sort of refer to that as an entourage effect, where some of the other components synergistically enhance the effect of, for example, CBD. So that's really the difference. In some provinces, Nabalone is covered through a drug benefit program as opposed to medicinal cannabis. So Omar, you might have some other comments?
Yeah, the only other comment I have again is THC is very different in its activity, which is like Nabalone, than CBD, which has very different activity. CBD is a better anti-anxiety drug, is a better anti-inflammatory. THC can be used for things such as neuropathic pain and other forms of pain as well. So they're different drugs. And so from a perspective of can they be used together? They could be used together, but they have different mechanisms of action as well.
Thank you for that question, Sandra. Next comes from George. Hey, George.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm located in Ontario, shall we say, and my age is an embarrassment. In 2 days' time, I'll be 84.
Bravo.
Congratulations.
Bravo.
That's not an
Bravo.
embarrassment. That's great.
My question really is revolving around this incidence of, or the high sort of incidence of Alzheimer's disease, which is in frontline sort of news these days. What is your knowledge at the moment of how effective the cannabinoids are in reducing agitation and to improve sleep when the side effects, particularly side effects of TSH, for example, can produce the very symptoms and signs of Alzheimer's disease itself, the loss of memory, cognition problems and so on. Where is the line? Where is the safety factor between inducing more of those symptoms as opposed to improving?
It's an interesting question. Dr. Glazer, I'll go to you first.
So it's actually, not only is it interesting, George, it's very complex and unfortunately very much in its infancy. So I actually do think within the last year, we have entertained trying to do further research. There is a lot of active research within this field, and I think that we may see some very promising results over the next several years. As it relates to your question specifically, side effects, well, I mean, there are pros and cons, there are benefits to all medications, and you do have to be careful. For example, with many of our commercially available medications for cognitive dysfunction, one of the side effects, for example, is hypertension, which you might not see with cannabinoids. So I think the future is very exciting. We're not there yet, and others may have other comments, but you do have to be very careful about side effects, especially from THC in the elderly, that the elderly are very much more sensitive, and you have to be careful.
Just to follow up on that, to what the doctor said, there are some really early encouraging studies on dementia, especially agitation associated with dementia. I just saw a study, it hasn't been published yet, on Huntington's disease and some of the effectiveness of cannabis. So a lot more great stuff to come, I'm sure, as this moves down the right road. And as I said before, as certain standards on manufacturing of these products get to a higher degree, you'll see a lot more studies and random control trials on these specific disease states for cannabis.
Umar?
The only last point I would add is that I think anybody with some of these cognitive deficits that are for dementia and Alzheimer's, be cautious with THC-based products. As Dr. Glazer said, I'm not, but I would say that CBD by itself, pure CBD, not with THC, but products that really don't have much THC in them, could be effective, and they don't have the direct effect on cognition that THC possibly can, and would be a safer alternative, especially in treating anxiety that may be associated with insomnia. That would be the general. But again, I would encourage you to talk to your cannabis clinician who can guide you further.
All right. Well, when we come back, final thoughts from our panelists. That's next. Welcome back to theZoomer. It's time for final thoughts from our panelists. So we'll start with Umar.
Well, thank you. And again, really appreciate our ability to participate today. My final thoughts are essentially very similar to what I've been saying for the last little bit. We need products that are well tested, well designed, that the people can trust, clinicians can trust, and that's what Optican and Optican.ca, you can see this information. We're providing these products with this data to convince clinicians at large, not just the early adopters, and physicians at large, pharmacists at large, about the safety and the efficacy of these products. We want that data to be available to everybody in order to make the right decision. And until these products that are not just inhaled, but the other variety that we're talking about and the survey says suggesting are the ones that are going to promulgate mass adoption, come to market, and we're going to have issues with the ability for many patient groups, such as the 12 million anxiety, pain, and other patient populations, to be able to access these medications. And I think that's our mission at Optican as well.
Ken.
Yeah, I think I'm really encouraged in the next 18 months, as the Trudeau government has committed to review the current legislation. I think that the questions were great today, and it really points to the fact that people are in search of information, and it's hard to get. The accessibility for wellness and medical patients really isn't there in the current regime in Canada. And speak to your MP and really advocate for accessibility. There are over 2,500 recreational stores across the country. You can't get your medical cannabis at a pharmacy, and that's a huge gap. And you need advice, and you need that oversight. And with that, the credibility will rise, and more doctors will be prescribing cannabis in the future. So really push for that. We've got this review coming up, and I really encourage you to have an active voice that you can push forward, especially with the government, to improve accessibility for medical cannabis in the country.
David?
2 points. Number one, the average baby boomer, age 55 to 75, depending on the research you look at, is managing 2 or 3 chronic conditions that are not cured but are managed with prescription medication. Think of where we were compared to 10, 20 years ago with hypertension, with cholesterol, with pre-diabetes. They're very used to, and you can hear from the questions they're asked, these are active people quite accustomed to ingesting, applying, consuming products to manage an underlying condition without that condition having been cured. So this is a permanent fact of life. This audience wants to know. Second point I want to make is that CARP intends, and this show is one example, to produce more shows like this, to carry information on our website, about the current state of play, the latest research, the latest findings. I'm not suggesting we're going to be offering the advice directly or replacing the doctor, but we are going to be giving all the panelists here a forum, and other companies a forum through the CARP website to keep bringing the latest information to this audience. So when in doubt, check out carp.ca and there'll be something there for sure.
Pat?
Yeah, thank you. And we appreciate being a part of this forum. Vividata is privileged to provide the voice of the consumer with cannabis, and we have for years, so it's great to hear everybody's thoughts. One final point that I would make is we looked, 2 years ago, some 41% of Canadians said they didn't know the difference between CBD and THC. That number is 34%. Only 31% today say they know. Those numbers are either too low or too high, depending on how you look at it. There needs to be more education, and I know there's restrictions on marketing. There are more publications coming out, but the government's review needs to address this because that information is not getting to people, and we're seeing it in our results.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Glazer.
Being the last, I guess, is the least advantageous, but here are my final thoughts. I like to emphasize the role of medical cannabis in the sort of comprehensive care for the patients. I think that leaders in the field of medical cannabis have an obligation to educate other healthcare professionals, and I want to see more of that moving forward. I think that we have to get rid of the stigma and the bias that is associated with cannabis in general, because it actually limits and sort of prejudices our thoughts and our actions. And that includes both physicians, healthcare professions, and other people, family members. We have to have the courage to bring that conversation to your physician. I think that lastly, we need to develop a comprehensive and a collaborative approach to medical cannabis, and we should be treating cannabis no different than our blood pressure medications or our insulins or other medications. I think that would behoove the field to move it forward. So I hope that happens over the next several years.
Some great advice. All right, a big thank you to you at home watching, to our live audience for being here, and to all my panelists for their expertise at the table. It was great to have you. That's all the time we have. For now, it's time to zoom out.